I've served in the military for 17 years, but nothing in my career prepared me for what happened that night. The sound of my daughter's broken voice would forever echo in the corners of my mind. It was 1:07 a.m. when my quarters door flew open with a force that startled me awake. The base was typically silent at this hour, with only the mechanical hum of watchtower lights and occasional radio chatter breaking the stillness. I'd always found comfort in that predictable quiet, the orderly nature of military life that had structured my existence since I was 21. But there was nothing orderly about the sight of Emily collapsing through my doorway. "Mom," she gasped, her voice barely audible. I was on my feet in an instant, catching her as she stumbled forward, the moonlight filtering through my window illuminated what the darkness had mercifully hidden. Her service uniform was torn at the shoulder, her left eye was swelling, and a thin trickle of blood had dried at the corner of her mouth. "Emily, what happened?" My training kicked in as I guided her to sit on my bed, already reaching for the first aid kit I kept beneath it. My daughter, my brilliant, strong-willed daughter, couldn't meet my eyes. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs as I gently dabbed at her split lip with antiseptic. When she finally spoke, her words cut through me like shrapnel. "He hit me," she whispered, "because of his mistress." The air left my lungs. Time seemed to stop as I processed those 7 words. Jason Holt. Captain Jason Holt. My son-in-law. Emily's commanding officer before. They married 2 years ago. "Tell me everything," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. As Emily's story unfolded in broken sentences and choked sobs, I felt a familiar sensation building in my chest. The same calm, focused rage that had carried me through 3 combat deployments. It was the cold clarity that comes when you know exactly what must be done, consequences be damned. I found text. "Messages," Emily said, wincing as I applied ice to her cheek. "A woman named Samantha. They've been seeing each other for months." "And when you confronted him?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Emily's eyes, so much like her father's, finally met mine. He laughed, said I was being hysterical. When I threatened to report him, she gestured to her face. He said no one would believe me, that he'd say I was emotionally unstable, that I attacked him first. "Did anyone see what happened?" She shook her head. "We were home, on base housing." I nodded, carefully documenting her injuries with my phone camera. Each click of the shutter felt like another nail in Jason's coffin. "He said his rank protects him," Emily continued, her voice growing stronger with anger. "That General Donovan would never take the word of a lieutenant over his. He said I'd destroy my career if I tried to report him." I set the phone down and took my daughter's hands in mine. At 38, I'd spent nearly half my life in uniform. I'd fought against prejudice and harassment, clawed my way up the ranks, and learned to navigate the complex politics of military leadership. I'd taught Emily everything I knew, encouraged her to follow in my footsteps, but I had failed to protect her from this. "Listen to me," I said, my voice low and certain. "There is no rank high enough to shield a man from justice. Not in my military." Emily's eyes widened. "Mom, you can't—" "I'm not asking permission, Emily. This isn't just about you and Jason anymore." I stood, my decision made. This is about every officer who thinks a command position gives them the right to abuse power. About every spouse who suffers in silence because they fear the system won't protect them. I walked to my closet and pulled out my dress uniform. Pressed, perfect, with decorations that told the story of a career built on integrity and sacrifice. "Mom," Emily tried again, "Jason has connections. His father served with General Donovan in Afghanistan." I turned to face her, seeing not just my injured daughter, but the young officer whose career was just beginning, the career she'd worked so hard for. "Do you trust me?" I asked. A moment of hesitation, then a nod. "Then trust that I know exactly what I'm doing." I laid my uniform across the foot of the bed. "Rest. I'll be back before morning formation." Before leaving, I gathered what I needed: the photographs of Emily's injuries, medical forms for the base hospital, and my service record. As I closed my quarters door behind me, the base clock read 2:15 a.m. The night air was cool against my face as I walked purposefully toward the officers' housing section. Lights were off in most windows. Good men and women sleeping soundly, unaware that one of their own had betrayed everything the uniform stood for. I didn't knock on Jason's door. I had my daughter's key. He was waiting in the living room, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his captain's bars gleaming on the uniform jacket thrown carelessly across a chair. "Catherine," he said, surprise briefly crossing his features before settling into smugness. Come to reason with your daughter? She's making dangerous accusations. I remained standing in the doorway, my expression neutral. Where is she? Probably crying to one of her friends. She'll calm down eventually. He took a sip of his drink. Women in uniform. So emotional. I entered the room slowly, studying this man who had once charmed my daughter with his confidence and ambition. I had never fully trusted him. Something in his smile had always seemed calculated, but Emily had been in love, and I'd wanted to support her choice. I've requested an emergency tribunal hearing for 0700, I said calmly. General Donovan will be there. Jason's glass paused halfway to his lips. You what? Domestic violence. Conduct unbecoming an officer. Perhaps more, depending on what the investigation reveals about this. Samantha. The glass came down hard on the coffee table. You have no proof. We both know that's not true. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then his face hardened. This is a family matter, Catherine. Emily and I will work through it. This stopped being a family matter when you put your hands on my daughter, I replied. This is now a military matter. He stood, using his height to try to intimidate me, a tactic I'd seen countless times from men who mistake physical presence for power. You're making a mistake, he said, voice low and threatening. My record is spotless. I've been selected for major next year. Who do you think they'll believe? A decorated captain with connections throughout the command, or a hysterical lieutenant and her overprotective mother? I smiled then, the kind of smile that had made subordinates nervously check their uniform standards. I guess we'll find out at 0700, Captain Holt. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Emily's career is over if you do this. Is that what you want for your daughter? I paused in the doorway, not bothering to look back. What I want is justice. And unlike you, I'm willing to fight for it. The night air felt different as I walked back to my quarters, charged with purpose. Emily was sleeping when I returned, her bruised face finally peaceful. I hung up my dress uniform and sat at my desk, preparing my statement for the tribunal. By the time the first hint of dawn colored the eastern sky, I was ready for war. The base tribunal room was sparse by design, polished wooden tables arranged in a horseshoe, the American flag and military standards displayed at attention, walls bare except for the Joint Base Lewis McChord insignia. It was a room built for truth and justice, not comfort. At 655, I sat straight-backed in my dress uniform. Emily beside me, her injuries partially concealed with makeup, but still visible to anyone who looked closely. Across the room, Jason sat with two fellow officers I recognized as his longtime friends. He wore the confident expression of a man who believed himself untouchable. The room filled quickly as word spread about the emergency hearing. Military justice was rarely a private affair, especially when it involved officers. I recognized faces from my command group, from Emily's unit, and several senior NCOs who had worked with both Jason and me over the years. At precisely 700, the side door opened. "Attention!" called the sergeant at the door. We all rose as General Marcus Donovan entered, his silver hair cropped close to his scalp, his uniform immaculate. At 58, the general commanded respect, not just through his rank, but through his reputation for fairness and integrity. I had served under him for 3 years and knew him to be a man of principle, which was exactly why I had requested him specifically for this tribunal. "Be seated," he said, taking his place at the center of the horseshoe. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on Emily's face before settling on mine. "Colonel Monroe, I understand you've called this emergency tribunal to address a serious matter involving Captain Holt and Lieutenant Rhodes." "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice calm and professional despite the storm raging inside me. Jason leaned forward. "General, if I may—" "You may not, Captain." Donovan cut him off without looking in his direction. "Colonel Monroe has the floor." I stood, gathering the folder I had prepared. "Sir, I'm here today to present evidence of domestic violence committed by Captain Jason Holt against Lieutenant Emily Rhodes, his wife, at approximately 2300 hours last night." A murmur rippled through the room. Jason's face remained impassive, but I noticed his right hand tightening into a fist on the table. "These are serious allegations, Colonel," General Donovan said. "I assume you have evidence to support them." "I do, sir." I approached the center table and placed my folder before the general. "These photographs were taken at 0130 this morning when Lieutenant Rhodes arrived at my quarters seeking medical assistance." General Donovan opened the folder. His expression didn't change as he studied the photographs, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. a tell I recognized from previous briefings. Lieutenant Rhodes, the general addressed Emily directly, are you willing to provide testimony regarding these injuries? Emily stood, her voice steadier than I had dared hope. Yes, sir. This is absurd, Jason interrupted. Sir, my wife and I had a disagreement last night. She became hysterical and struck me. I merely defended myself. Is that so? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Before Jason could respond, I placed another document on the table. General, this is the security. Camera footage from the officers' housing area, showing Lieutenant Rhodes leaving their residence at approximately 22:45, clearly injured and in distress. Jason's confident smile faltered. Furthermore, I continued, I've included statements from 3 neighbors who heard the altercation and Captain Holt's threats. One of them recorded audio on their phone after hearing what they described as a woman screaming. The room had gone completely silent. Even Jason's supporters were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Sir? Jason tried again. This is clearly a personal matter that has been blown out of proportion. Lieutenant Rhodes and I— Captain Holt, General Donovan interrupted, his voice cutting like steel. Domestic violence is never a personal matter in my command. It violates not only civilian law but the Uniform Code of Military Justice and everything this uniform stands for. I remained standing, my eyes fixed on the general. There's more, sir. Donovan nodded for me to continue. The altercation occurred after Lieutenant Rhodes discovered evidence of Captain Holt's ongoing extramarital affair with a civilian contractor on base, Samantha Blake. Another murmur, louder this time. Jason's face had gone pale. Colonel Monroe, these are serious accusations that will require thorough investigation, General Donovan said. Captain Holt, do you have anything to say in your defense? Jason stood, his composure visibly cracking around the edges. Sir, with all due respect, Colonel Monroe is overstepping. My personal life became relevant the moment you struck a Y. Fellow officer, I cut in, my patience finally snapping, an officer who happens to be my daughter. Colonel, the general cautioned. My apologies, sir. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I have one final piece of evidence. I reached into my pocket and removed a small digital recorder, placing it on the table. What is that? Jason demanded, his voice rising. A recording of our, conversation at 0215 this morning in which you admitted to striking Lieutenant Rhodes and threatened her career if she reported the incident. The color drained completely from Jason's face. You can't. That's legal in the state of Washington when one party consents to the recording. I finished for him, which I did. General Donovan picked up the recorder and addressed the room at large. This tribunal will recess for 1 hour while I review all evidence privately. Captain Holt, you will remain in the building under escort. Colonel Monroe, Lieutenant Rhodes, please wait in my office. As the room began to clear, Jason lunged toward me, his voice low and venomous. You've made a terrible mistake, Catherine. This isn't over. I met his gaze without flinching. You're right about one thing, Captain. This isn't over. It's just beginning. In General Donovan's office, Emily sat rigidly on the edge of her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The makeup was beginning to wear off, revealing the full extent of her injuries in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Mom, she whispered once we were alone, what will happen now? I sat beside her, finally allowing myself to be her, mother rather than a colonel. Justice, Emily, one way or another. And if they don't believe us? If his connections protect him? I took her hand, noticing for the first time how much it resembled my own. Strong, capable hands that had learned to salute before they'd learned to vote. Then we keep fighting, I said simply, because that's what Monroes do. Outside the window, morning formation was underway, hundreds of soldiers standing at attention under the Washington sky. Emily watched them, her expression unreadable. I loved him once, she said softly. I thought he was everything I wanted. I know, sweetheart. Was it my fault? Did I miss the signs? I turned her face gently toward mine. Listen to me. What happened was not your fault. Not ever. Jason made his choices. Now he has to face the consequences. She nodded, not entirely convinced but willing to try. In that moment, despite the bruises and the fear, I saw the little girl who had once declared she would grow up to be just like Mommy, brave and unbreakable. We sat in silence until General Donovan returned, his face grave with the weight of his decision. Whatever came next, I knew we would face it together as officers, as women, as family. And no rank in the world could protect Jason Holt from that. The tribunal reconvened exactly 1 hour later. The room had filled even more during the recess, with officers and enlisted personnel standing against the walls. News traveled fast on a military base, especially news involving a captain, a lieutenant, and allegations of domestic violence. I sat ramrod, straight beside Emily, my expression carefully neutral. Years of military service had taught me to compartmentalize my emotions, to separate the personal from the professional. But today, those lines were blurred beyond recognition. This wasn't just about military justice. It was about my daughter. General Donovan entered, and once again, we all rose. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife. He placed a folder on the table before him. My evidence, now reviewed and assessed. "I've examined the evidence presented by Colonel Monroe," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "I've listened to the audio recording and reviewed the security footage. I've also spoken privately with Lieutenant Rhodes." Jason shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence visibly cracking around the edges. His eyes darted to his friends, then to the door, as if calculating his chances of escape. "Captain Holt," General Donovan continued, "the evidence against you is substantial and deeply troubling. Not only have you violated the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but you've betrayed the trust placed in you as an officer of the United States military." Jason stood, straightening his uniform jacket. "General, with all due respect, I believe this situation has been misconstrued. My wife—" "Captain," Donovan interrupted sharply, "you are not being asked to speak at this time." The general turned to me. "Colonel Monroe, as the reporting officer in this case, do you have anything further to add before I render my decision?" I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. "Sir, I do." Jason's attorney, a major I recognized from the JAG office, leaned toward him and whispered something urgently. Jason shook his head, clearly disagreeing with whatever counsel he was receiving. "As both a superior officer and a mother," I began, my voice steady, "I've witnessed not only the physical injuries inflicted on Lieutenant Rhodes, but the psychological impact of Captain Holt's actions. This isn't an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of months of controlling and abusive behavior." I turned slightly, allowing myself to look directly at Jason for the first time since the tribunal began. Captain Holt believed his rank would shield him from consequences. He believed the system would protect him rather than his victim. He was wrong. Emily sat perfectly still beside me, her gaze fixed straight ahead, but I felt her hand brush against mine. A silent thank you. "Sir," I continued, addressing General Donovan, "I respectfully request that the full weight of military justice be applied in this case, not only for Lieutenant Rhodes's sake, but for every service member who has suffered abuse in silence, believing that rank trumps justice." I sat down, and in the moment of silence that followed, I heard Jason's sharp intake of breath. "Thank you, Colonel," General Donovan said. He turned his attention to Jason. "Captain Holt, do you understand the gravity of the allegations against you?" Jason stood again, his facade of confidence now completely evaporated. "Yes, sir." "And do you have anything to say in your defense before I render my decision?" Jason's attorney stood with him this time. "General, we request a continuance to properly prepare Captain Holt's defense. This hearing was called with minimal notice and—" "Major Collins," Donovan interrupted, "this is not a court-martial. This is a preliminary tribunal to determine whether formal charges should be filed. Your client has had ample opportunity to address the allegations." The attorney subsided, clearly unhappy but unable to argue with the general's logic. Jason cleared his throat. "Sir, I admit that Lieutenant Rhodes and I had an altercation last night, but it wasn't as she described. I never intended—" "Your intentions are irrelevant, Captain," Donovan said coldly. "Your actions are what concern this tribunal." The general closed the folder and looked directly at Jason. "Based on the evidence presented, I am ordering your immediate relief from command pending a formal investigation. You will surrender your military ID and remain confined to quarters except for scheduled appearances before investigating authorities." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Relief from command was a serious measure, one that would permanently stain Jason's record, regardless of the outcome of the investigation. "Furthermore," Donovan continued, "a military protective order is hereby issued, prohibiting any contact between you and Lieutenant Rhodes. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and confinement." Jason's face had gone ashen. "Sir, my career should have been your consideration before you struck a fellow officer." Donovan finished for him. "Colonel Monroe, Lieutenant Rhodes, you are dismissed. Captain Holt, you will remain for processing. As Emily and I stood to leave, Jason suddenly lunged forward. This isn't over, Catherine, he hissed, quiet enough that only Emily and I could hear. You'll regret this. I met his gaze steadily. No, Jason, you will. Outside the tribunal room, Emily leaned against the wall, her composure finally cracking. Mom, she whispered, what happens now? I put my arm around her shoulders, guiding her away from the curious stares of passing personnel. Now, we heal, and we make sure this never happens to anyone else. We walked in silence across the base, the morning sun now high in the sky. Other service members nodded respectfully as we passed, word of the tribunal already spreading. I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in Emily's courage, sorrow that she had to endure such pain. In my quarters, Emily sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. I keep thinking about what he said, that it's not over. I made tea, a ritual that had always calmed us both since Emily was a teenager. Jason is lashing out because he's scared. For the first time in his life, his actions have consequences. But what if he's right? What if his connections protect him? What if... Emily, I interrupted gently, handing her a steaming mug. In all my years of service, I've learned one thing. Truth may be delayed, but it's never denied. General Donovan is a man of integrity. He won't be swayed by connections or politics. She sipped her tea, wincing slightly as the hot liquid touched her split lip. I feel like I've failed somehow, like I should have seen this coming. The only failure here is Jason's, I said firmly. Not yours. Never yours. The weight of the morning's events seemed to settle around us like a heavy fog. Emily had trusted this man, married him, believed in their future together. Now, in the space of a few hours, that future had shattered. What about Samantha? Emily asked quietly. His mistress? I hadn't considered the other woman in this equation, the civilian contractor Jason had been seeing behind Emily's back. What about her? She should know what kind of man he really is. I studied my daughter's face, seeing not jealousy, but genuine concern. That's not your responsibility, Emily, isn't it? If he's capable of hurting me, what might he do to her? It was a valid point, one that reflected Emily's fundamental decency. Even after everything Jason had done, she was thinking of protecting others from him. Let's take this one step at a time, I said. The investigation will look into all aspects of Jason's conduct, including his relationship with Ms. Blake. Emily nodded, setting down her mug. I should probably go back to my... She stopped, realizing she couldn't return to the home she shared with Jason. You'll stay here for now, I said. We'll figure out the rest later. As Emily retreated to the spare bedroom to rest, I sat alone with my thoughts. The tribunal had been just the beginning. Jason's threat echoed in my mind. This isn't over. I suspected he was right, but not in the way he intended. This wasn't over, because justice was just beginning. 3 days after the tribunal, I was summoned to General Donovan's office. The investigation into Jason's conduct was moving with unusual speed, fueled by the clear evidence and Jason's own partial admission of guilt. Colonel Monroe, Donovan gestured for me to take a seat across from his desk. Thank you for coming. Of course, sir. I sat, noting the thick file folder on his desk labeled with Jason's name and case number. How is Lieutenant Rhodes? He asked, his professional tone softening slightly. Recovering, sir. The physical injuries will heal faster than the emotional ones. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. In his 30-year career, he had likely seen similar cases, though perhaps not involving officers of Jason's rank. I've received some concerning information, he said, opening the folder. Captain Holt has filed a counter-accusation against Lieutenant Rhodes, claiming she was emotionally unstable and had threatened self-harm if he left her. My blood ran cold. That's absurd, sir. I agree, but his attorney is pushing this narrative aggressively. Donovan removed a document and slid it across the desk to me. He's also claiming you used your position to orchestrate a witch hunt against him due to personal dislike. I scanned the document, a formal complaint filed with the Inspector General's office, alleging abuse of authority and professional misconduct on my part. He's desperate, I said, returning the paper. This won't stand up to scrutiny. No, it won't, Donovan agreed. But it will complicate matters. The Washington headquarters is taking notice of this case. Jason's father still has connections there. I had expected this, Jason trying to muddy the waters, to transform himself from abuser to victim. It was a tactic as old as time. "There's more," Donovan continued, his expression grave. "Samantha Blake has come forward." That caught me by surprise. "The mistress?" "She denies any romantic involvement with Holt, but admits to a close friendship. She's supporting his version of events." "Of course she is," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Sir, with respect, none of this changes the facts. We have photographic evidence, audio recordings, and multiple witnesses." General Donovan leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Catherine, I've known you for how long now?" 7 years? 8, sir, since Afghanistan. 8 years. In that time, I've never known you to be anything but straightforward and honest. I believe you, and more importantly, I believe Lieutenant Rhodes." He closed the folder. "But this case is becoming politically charged. There are those who would prefer it simply disappear." I felt a flicker of alarm. "Are you saying the investigation might be dropped?" "No. I'm saying we need to be absolutely certain our evidence is unimpeachable." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the parade ground. "Captain Holt comes from a military family with significant influence. His father served with the current Army Chief of Staff. There are already whispers that we're overreacting to a domestic dispute." The familiar, simmering anger rose in my chest. "A domestic dispute that left my daughter with a black eye and split lip." "I know." Donovan turned back to face me. "Which is why I'm not backing down, regardless of the pressure. But I need you to understand the forces we're up against." I nodded, grateful for his candor and support. "What happens next, sir?" "The investigation continues. In the A. Meantime, Lieutenant Rhodes will be temporarily reassigned to my office, away from her usual duties where she might encounter Captain Holt or his supporters." "And me, sir?" Donovan smiled slightly. "You, Colonel, will continue doing exactly what you've been doing, running your department with the same efficiency and integrity you've always shown. The best response to these accusations is to be above reproach in every aspect of your duties." As I left the general's office, I spotted a familiar figure waiting in the anteroom, Samantha Blake. She was younger than I had imagined, perhaps 25, with sleek dark hair and an expensive-looking civilian outfit that seemed out of place among the uniforms. Our eyes met briefly before I nodded politely and continued past her. I heard her quick intake of breath as if she'd been expecting, perhaps hoping for, a confrontation. Later that afternoon, as I was reviewing training schedules in my office, there was a soft knock at my door. "Enter," I called, expecting my aide with the personnel reports I'd requested. Instead, Samantha Blake slipped into the room, closing the door behind her. "Colonel Monroe," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I need to speak with you." I set down my pen, studying her carefully. "Ms. Blake, this is unexpected." "I know." She remained standing near the door as if ensuring a quick escape route. "I shouldn't be here. And yet you are." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit." She did, perching on the edge as if ready to flee at any moment. Up close, I could see the carefully applied makeup, the expensive watch, the designer handbag, all suggesting a lifestyle beyond what a typical civilian contractor might afford. "I lied," she said abruptly, "to the investigators, about Jason." I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse quickened. "Go on." "We were involved for 6 months. He told me his marriage was over in all but name, that Emily was, emotionally unstable, that he was only staying out of duty." She looked down at her hands. "I believed him because I wanted to believe him. And now? Now I know he was lying. About everything." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a phone. "He sent me these the night he hit Emily." She placed the phone on my desk, open to a text conversation. The messages from Jason were disturbing, boasting about putting Emily in her place, threatening what he would do if Samantha ever crossed him as Emily had. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Because I'm scared," she admitted, her composure finally cracking. "When I saw the way he wrote about Emily, what he did to her, I realized I could be next. But I was too afraid to tell the truth to the investigators. Jason said he would ruin me if I didn't back his story." I glanced at the phone again, noting the timestamp. "These messages were sent before you gave your statement to the investigation team." She nodded miserably. "Yes, I lied because I was afraid. But after I saw you today, I couldn't keep lying." "What changed?" Samantha looked up, meeting my gaze directly, for the first time. I saw how you walked. Straight, strong, unafraid. I realized that's who I want to be. Someone who stands up for what's right, no matter the consequences. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Whatever her mistakes in becoming involved with Jason, she was trying to make amends now, at considerable personal risk. Ms. Blake, I said carefully, I appreciate your honesty, but I'm not the person you should be telling this to. I know, she replied. I've made an appointment with General Donovan's office for tomorrow morning. I wanted you to know first. I wanted to apologize to you and to your daughter. As she stood to leave, I found myself respecting her courage. Ms. Blake, Samantha, what you're doing takes strength. She paused at the door, a sad smile, crossing her face. No, Colonel. What you're doing, standing up for your daughter against a system designed to protect men like Jason, that takes strength. I'm just trying to fix my mistake before someone else gets hurt. After she left, I sat for a long moment contemplating what had just happened. Samantha's evidence could be the final piece needed to ensure Jason faced real consequences. But more than that, her decision to come forward represented something I had always believed in. That when confronted with truth and integrity, people often found their better selves. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since Emily had stumbled through my door in the early morning darkness, I felt the scales of justice beginning to tilt in our favor. 2 weeks after Samantha Blake came forward with the incriminating text messages, the pace of the investigation accelerated. Jason remained confined to quarters, stripped of his command responsibilities, while Emily had settled into her temporary assignment in General Donovan's office. I maintained my usual routine, running my department with the same efficiency I always had, but beneath the surface, tension simmered. Jason's supporters, mostly officers who had risen through the ranks with him, made their displeasure known through small acts of resistance, delayed responses to emails, forgotten invitations to briefings, and the occasional whispered comment in the officers' mess. The morning of the formal Article 32 hearing, the military equivalent of a grand jury proceeding, dawned clear and cool. I dressed in my Class A uniform, every ribbon and medal in place, a visual reminder of my years of service and dedication to the military I loved. Emily was waiting outside my quarters, similarly attired, her bruises now faded to barely visible shadows. Ready? I asked, noting the determined set of her jaw. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. As I'll ever be. We walked together across the base, past the morning PT, formations and the flag being raised over headquarters. Several officers and enlisted personnel nodded respectfully as we passed. Word of Jason's conduct, and of Samantha's evidence, had spread throughout the base, and while some remained loyal to him, many more had quietly indicated their support for Emily. The hearing was held in the same room as the initial tribunal, but the atmosphere was markedly different. Military attorneys from the JAG office sat at tables on either side, with a hearing officer, a colonel from another base, brought in to ensure impartiality, presiding. The room was closed to spectators, with only those directly involved in the case permitted to attend. Jason sat with his defense team, his uniform immaculate but his face drawn and pale. He avoided looking at Emily, or me as we entered, focusing intently on the papers before him. "All rise," called the sergeant at the door as the hearing officer entered. Colonel James Harrington, a career JAG officer with a reputation for strict adherence to protocol, took his seat and surveyed the room. "Be seated," he said, his voice clipped and formal. "This Article 32 hearing will now come to order. We are here to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to proceed with court-martial charges against Captain Jason Holt." The prosecuting attorney, Major Sarah Chen, rose first. "Sir, the government intends to prove that Captain Holt violated Articles 128 and 133 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice by committing assault against Lieutenant Emily Rhodes and by engaging in conduct unbecoming an officer. And a gentleman," Colonel Harrington nodded. "Proceed with your first witness, Major. The government calls Lieutenant Emily Rhodes." Emily walked to the witness stand with measured steps, her back straight and her gaze fixed ahead. She took the oath with a clear, unwavering voice, and as she seated herself, I caught a glimpse of the determined young woman I had raised, a daughter who had inherited my strength and resilience. For the next hour, Emily testified about her relationship with Jason, describing the gradual escalation from controlling behavior to emotional abuse and finally to physical violence. She spoke clearly and factually, without embellishment, her military training evident in her precise recounting of events. Jason's attorney, a civilian hired by his family to supplement his military defense team, cross-examined Emily aggressively, attempting to portray her as emotionally unstable and jealous. "Isn't it true, Lieutenant," he asked, his tone condescending, "that you threatened to harm yourself if Captain Holt left you?" Emily's response was immediate and firm. "No, sir, it is not true." "And isn't it also true that you struck Captain Holt first on the night in question?" "No, sir. I never raised a hand to my husband." The attorney changed tactics, producing printouts of text messages between Emily and a female friend, dated several months earlier. "Lieutenant Rhodes, could you please read the highlighted portion of this message you sent to Captain Lauren Martinez?" Emily glanced at the paper. "Sometimes I just want to slap some sense into him," she read, her voice steady. "You wrote that about Captain Holt, did you not?" "Yes, sir." It was a figure of speech expressing frustration, not a literal threat. "A figure of speech," the attorney repeated skeptically. "Just as Captain Holt's texts to Ms. Blake might have been figures of speech rather than literal accounts of events?" Before Emily could respond, Major Chen stood. "Objection. Counsel is testifying and making improper comparisons." "Sustained," Colonel Harrington ruled. "Counselor, confine yourself to questions for this witness." The cross-examination continued for another 30 minutes, but Emily remained composed, refusing to be provoked into emotional responses that might undermine her credibility. When she finally stepped down from the stand, I saw the slight tremor in her hands, the only outward sign of the strain she was under. I was called next, testifying to Emily's condition when she arrived at my quarters and the statements Jason had made during our confrontation at his home. The defense attorney's questions focused primarily on my potential bias as Emily's mother, suggesting that my maternal instincts had led me to exaggerate the severity of the situation. "Colonel Monroe," he asked, "isn't it possible that in your concern for your daughter, you interpreted Captain Holt's actions in the worst possible light?" "No, sir," I replied evenly. "My assessment was based on observable physical injuries and recorded statements, not interpretation. And you didn't let your personal feelings about your son-in-law influence your decision to pursue such severe measures against him?" I met his gaze directly. "Counselor, I've spent 20 years making decisions based on facts, not feelings. This case was no different." After my testimony, Samantha Blake took the stand. She appeared nervous, but determined, confirming her romantic relationship with Jason and authenticating the text messages she had provided to the investigation. The defense attempted to portray her as a scorned lover seeking revenge, but the messages themselves were difficult to dismiss or explain away. As the hearing entered its second day, medical experts testified regarding Emily's injuries, and character witnesses for both Jason and Emily gave their assessments. By mid-afternoon, both sides had presented their evidence, and Colonel Harrington called a brief recess before closing arguments. In the hallway outside the hearing room, Emily stood by a window, staring out at the base. "You did well in there," I told her, joining her at the window. She turned to me, her expression troubled. "His attorney made me sound like I was crazy, Mom. What if Colonel Harrington believes him?" "The evidence speaks for itself, Emily. The texts, the medical records, the security footage, they tell the truth, even when words try to obscure it." She nodded, though doubt still clouded her eyes. "Jason looks so normal, so convincing. I keep thinking about all the people who still believe in him, who think I'm exaggerating or making this up for attention. People will believe what they want to believe," I said gently. "We can't control that. All we can control is our own integrity." When the hearing reconvened, Major Chen delivered a powerful closing argument, methodically laying out the evidence against Jason and emphasizing the military's responsibility to hold its officers to the highest standards of conduct. "The Uniform Code of Military Justice exists not just to punish wrongdoing," she concluded, "but to uphold the honor and integrity of our armed forces. Captain Holt's actions violated not only Lieutenant Rhodes's trust and physical safety, but also the sacred trust placed in him as an officer. The evidence clearly supports moving forward with a court-martial." Jason's attorney countered with a passionate plea for leniency, portraying Jason as a dedicated officer caught in a turbulent marriage who had made a single regrettable mistake during an emotional confrontation. "One moment of poor judgment," he argued, "should not erase years of exemplary service. Captain Holt accepts responsibility for losing his temper, but the incident has been greatly exaggerated. Administrative action, not a court-martial, is the appropriate response." As the defense attorney spoke, I watched Jason's face. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something unexpected. Not remorse or shame, but cold calculation. He was already planning his next move, already thinking beyond this hearing to how he would rebuild his reputation and career. Colonel Harrington closed the hearing with a brief statement. I will review all evidence and testimony presented here and render my recommendation regarding court-martial within 72 hours. This hearing is, adjourned. Outside, as Emily and I walked back to our quarters, a light rain began to fall, matching the somber mood that had settled over us. The hearing had been exhausting, forcing Emily to relive her trauma while enduring attacks on her character and credibility. What happens now? She asked quietly. We wait, I replied, placing an arm around her shoulders. And we remember that no matter what Colonel Harrington decides, you've already won the most important battle. What's that? You broke your silence. You stood up for yourself. And in doing so, you showed every other person suffering in silence that they don't have to accept abuse, no matter how powerful their abuser might be. Emily leaned against me briefly, drawing strength from my words. Then she straightened, raising her face to the rain, letting it wash away the strain of the past 2 days. I couldn't have done it without you, she said. You're stronger than you know, Emily. You always have been. As we continued walking, I felt a strange sense of peace despite the uncertainty ahead. Whatever happened next, we had spoken our truth, and sometimes that was victory enough. 3 days later, Emily and I sat in General Donovan's office waiting for him to deliver Colonel Harrington's decision regarding the court-martial. The minutes stretched into an eternity as we sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the antique clock on the general's bookshelf. When Donovan finally entered, his expression gave nothing away. He sat behind his desk, placing a folder between us. Colonel Harrington has submitted his recommendation, he said without preamble. He has found sufficient evidence to proceed with the general court-martial on all charges. Emily exhaled softly beside me, her shoulders relaxing slightly. However, Donovan continued, there have been developments. The way he said the word sent a chill through me. What kind of developments, sir? Captain Holt has submitted his resignation from the Army, effective immediately. The news hit me like a physical blow. Resignation? But that would mean that he avoids court-martial entirely. Donovan finished, his displeasure evident in the tight line of his mouth. His attorney has negotiated a deal with the convening authority. In exchange for his immediate resignation and a general discharge under honorable conditions, all charges will be dropped. Emily stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. He gets to just walk away? After everything he did? Lieutenant, Donovan cautioned, though his tone was gentle. Please sit. She did, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. I understand your frustration, he continued. I share it. But the reality is that courts-martial are time-consuming, expensive, and public. The convening authority, in this case General Matthews at Division, has the discretion to accept alternatives that serve the interests of military justice while avoiding a lengthy legal process. With respect, sir, I said carefully, how does allowing Captain Holt to resign with an honorable discharge serve justice? General discharge, not honorable, Donovan corrected, and it removes him from the service. Immediately, which was our primary goal, to ensure he couldn't use his position to harm Lieutenant Rhodes or anyone else. Emily shook her head, tears of frustration brimming in her eyes. He wins again, just like he always said he would. Donovan leaned forward, his expression earnest. Lieutenant Rhodes, I understand this feels like defeat, but consider the alternatives. A court-martial would mean months of preparation, public testimony about intimate details of your marriage, cross-examination designed to undermine your credibility, and no guarantee of conviction. So we just give up? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Donovan replied firmly. We accept a resolution that achieves our most important objective, removing Captain Holt from a position where he can abuse his authority, while sparing you the additional trauma of a public trial. I placed a hand on Emily's arm, feeling the tension thrumming through her. What are the terms of the resignation, sir? In addition to the general discharge, Holt will receive no severance pay and will be barred from future federal employment. The resignation will be processed within 48 hours, and he will be required to vacate base housing immediately thereafter. And the protective order? I asked. Remains in effect until he leaves the base, Donovan assured me. Furthermore, I've arranged for a notation in his personnel file regarding the circumstances of his resignation. It won't be a court-martial conviction, but it will raise red flags for any civilian employer who conducts a thorough background check. Emily stood again, moving to the window that overlooked the parade ground where formations were conducted each morning. "When I was a cadet," she said quietly, "they taught us that the military justice system was fair and impartial. That rank and connections didn't matter when it came to accountability." Donovan sighed. "In an ideal world, Lieutenant, that would always be true. But we serve in the real world, where justice sometimes requires compromise." She turned back to face us, her expression resolute despite the tears she quickly wiped away. "When does he leave?" "His out processing begins today," Donovan replied. "He'll be gone by the end of the week." After the meeting, Emily and I walked in silence toward the officers' club. The news of Jason's resignation deal had left us both conflicted, relieved that he would be removed from the military, but frustrated by the compromise that allowed him to avoid a court-martial. "I should be happy," Emily said as we found a quiet table in the corner of the club. "He's gone. He can't hurt me or anyone else here again." "But it feels incomplete," I suggested, "like he's escaping real consequences." She nodded, absently stirring her coffee. "Exactly. He always said the system would protect him because of who his father was, because of his connections. And in the end, he was right." I considered my response carefully. As a career officer, I had seen the military justice system at its best and its worst. I had witnessed both remarkable fairness and disappointing compromise. "Emily, the system isn't perfect," I admitted. "No human institution is. But think about where we were 3 weeks ago when he first hit you. He believed he was untouchable, that his rank and position would shield him from any accountability. Now he's being forced out of the career he valued above all else, with a discharge that will follow him forever." "It's not enough," she insisted. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's something. And sometimes, in this imperfect world, something is the best we can hope for." We finished our coffee in contemplative silence, each lost in our own thoughts about justice and compromise. As we left the officers' club, we nearly collided with Samantha Blake, who was coming up the steps. "Lieutenant Rhodes," she said, clearly surprised. "Colonel Monroe, I didn't expect to see you here." Emily regarded her coolly. Despite Samantha's eventual cooperation with the investigation, the fact remained that she had been involved with Jason while he was married to Emily. "Ms. Blake," I acknowledged politely. "Are you here on business?" She nodded, clutching her purse tightly. "Yes. I'm finishing up some paperwork before my contract ends next week. I'm leaving the base." "I see," I said, when Emily remained silent. "Well, we won't keep you." As we started to move past her, Samantha reached out, gently touching Emily's arm. "Lieutenant Rhodes, Emily, I know nothing I say can make up for what happened, but I want you to know how sorry I am. I never thought he would. I never imagined he was capable of violence." Emily stiffened at her touch but didn't pull away. "Did you know he was married when you got involved with him?" Samantha lowered her eyes. "Yes. He told me it was over in all but name, that you were staying together just for appearances. I wanted to believe him. We always want to believe the lies that make us feel better about our choices," Emily said, her voice not unkind despite the harshness of her words. Samantha nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right. I have no excuse. But I want you to know that what you did, standing up to him, reporting him despite the risks to your career, it made me realize I need to be stronger too. I need to make better choices." For the first time, Emily's expression softened slightly. "I hope you do, Ms. Blake, for your own sake." As Samantha continued into the officers' club, Emily watched her go with a thoughtful expression. "She's another casualty, isn't she? Another person he manipulated and used." "Yes," I agreed. "Jason leaves behind a trail of damage wherever he goes. But unlike many abusers, he's now facing at least some consequences for his actions." Later that evening, as we prepared dinner in my quarters, Emily seemed more at peace than she had been since the news of Jason's resignation deal. "I've been thinking," she said, chopping vegetables with practiced precision, "about what happens next." "For Jason?" I asked, sliding a casserole into the oven. "No, for me." She set down the knife, turning to face me fully. "I've been offered a transfer to Fort Benning. A fresh start, away from here and all the whispers and sympathetic looks. The news caught me by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have." Emily was young, with a promising career ahead of her. Staying at Lewis McCord, where every corner held memories of Jason, and where people would always associate her with the scandal, would be difficult. "When would you go?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral despite the pang I felt at the thought of her leaving. Next month. It's an instructor position at the infantry school. Better hours, good career progression opportunities. She hesitated. What do you think? I crossed the kitchen and took her hands in mine, noting how similar they were to my own. Strong, capable hands that had overcome adversity. I think, I said carefully, that you need to make this decision for yourself, not for me or anyone else. But if you're asking if I'll support you, the answer is yes. Always. Emily smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. I was hoping you'd say that, because I already accepted the position this afternoon. I laughed, pulling her into a hug. That's my girl. Always one step ahead. As we finished preparing dinner, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had taken over the past month, from that terrible night when Emily had arrived at my door, broken and afraid, to this moment of tentative hope and new beginnings. The path to justice had been neither straight nor complete, but we had walked it together, mother and daughter, officers and women, survivors. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. 4 months after Jason's resignation from the Army, I stood at the Fort Benning parade ground watching Emily lead her first class of infantry candidates through drill formations. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly, but Emily moved with confidence and authority, her voice carrying across the field as she corrected a young lieutenant's positioning. I had flown in the previous night, taking a rare weekend leave to visit her in her new assignment. The separation had been difficult. After 17 years of serving at the same bases, being stationed apart was an adjustment for both of us. But the distance had been good for Emily, giving her space to rebuild her sense of self away from the whispers and sideways glances that had followed her at Lewis McCord. She's impressive, a voice said beside me. I turned to find Colonel Patricia Winters, Emily's new commanding officer, watching the training with approval. One of the best instructors we've had in the program. Thank you, I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. She's always been determined. Colonel Winters nodded. We know about what happened at Lewis McCord, of course. The military grapevine is efficient, if not always accurate. She glanced at me. For what it's worth, the way she handled herself through that situation, with dignity and courage, that's exactly what we try to instill in these candidates. The formation broke for water, and Emily spotted me standing with Colonel Winters. She said something to her second-in-command before jogging over, her face flushed with exertion, but her eyes bright. Mom, I didn't expect you until lunch. She saluted Colonel Winters crisply. Ma'am, at ease? Lieutenant, Winters said with a smile. I was just telling your mother what an asset you've been to the program. She checked her watch. I'll leave you two to catch up. Lieutenant Rhodes, remember we have that staff meeting at 1400. Yes, ma'am. As Colonel Winters walked away, Emily turned to me with a broad smile. Come on, I've got 30 minutes before I need to get back to the class. There's a decent coffee shop just off the parade ground. We walked together, drawing occasional curious glances from personnel who recognized me by my rank insignia and wondered about my connection to their instructor. At the coffee shop, Emily claimed a corner table while I ordered for both of us. Black coffee for me, caramel latte for her, a preference she'd developed in college and never outgrown. You seem happy, I observed, setting the drinks on the table. Emily considered this, stirring her latte thoughtfully. I am mostly. The work is challenging in the best way. My colleagues respect me, and no one here looks at me like I'm broken. You were never broken, I said firmly. Wounded, perhaps, but never broken. She smiled at the distinction. How are things back at Lewis McCord? Busy. General Donovan is implementing new training protocols for identifying and preventing domestic abuse within the ranks. I took a sip of my coffee. He's asked me to help develop the curriculum. Your case was a wake-up call for a lot of people. My case, Emily repeated softly. It's strange to think of it that way. Something that happened to me, but also something bigger, something that might help others. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, watching young officers and trainees pass by the window. In the 4 months since Emily's transfer, we had spoken regularly by phone, but there was an unspoken agreement not to dwell on the past. This was the first time she had voluntarily brought up what had happened with Jason. Have you heard anything? She asked finally. About him? I hesitated, unsure how much to share. Some. He's in Seattle now, working for a defense contractor. Emily nodded, her expression neutral. And Samantha? She completed her contract and left the base shortly after you did. I don't know where she went after that. I hope she's okay, Emily said, surprising me. I was angry at her for a long time, but eventually I realized she was another one of his victims. He manipulated her the same way he manipulated me. I studied my daughter's face, noting the new lines of maturity around her eyes, the quiet strength that had always been there but now seemed more pronounced. "That's very generous of you." She shrugged. "It's not generosity so much as perspective. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, about the patterns I didn't see until it was too late." She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "There's something I haven't told you." "What is it?" I asked, a flutter of concern rising in my chest. "I've been seeing someone. A counselor, I mean. The base has a program for survivors of domestic violence. It's been helpful." Relief washed over me. "Emily, that's wonderful. I'm glad. You're getting support." At first, I didn't want to go. I thought it meant admitting weakness, or that I couldn't handle things on my own. She met my eyes directly. "But then I remembered what you always told me when I was growing up." "What's that?" "That strength isn't about never needing help. It's about having the courage to ask for it when you do." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Good advice. I should try taking it myself sometimes." Emily laughed, a bright, clear sound that momentarily transported me back to her childhood, to soccer games and school plays and countless small triumphs celebrated together. "You're the strongest person I know, Mom. But even you need backup sometimes." Our conversation shifted to lighter topics. Emily's new apartment off base, my ongoing battle with the base landscaping committee about native plant gardens, the latest ridiculous training video that had become a running joke among the officers. For those few precious minutes, we were simply mother and daughter, sharing coffee and conversation like countless others around the world. As Emily prepared to return to her class, she suddenly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I never properly thanked you, you know, for that night, for believing me without question, for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." "You never had to thank me," I said softly. "That's what mothers do." "Not all mothers," she replied. I got lucky. I watched her jog back to the parade ground, her posture perfect, her stride confident. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since the night she had appeared at my door, with her uniform torn and her spirit nearly broken. Emily was healing, rebuilding, moving forward, and in doing so, she was helping me heal as well. That evening, after Emily's staff meeting, we drove to a small restaurant in Columbus that Colonel Winters had recommended. Over plates of Southern-style seafood, Emily told me about her plans. For the future, her application for captain, her hope to eventually transition to a role in policy development, focusing specifically on improving support systems for military families in crisis. "I want something good to come from what happened," she explained. "Maybe I can help change things from the inside, make sure other people in similar situations don't feel so alone." "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it more deeply than words could express. As we drove back to the base, Emily turned to me with a hesitant expression. "There's one more thing I've been thinking about," she said. "Something I need to do before I can fully move on." "What's that?" "I need to face him. One last time. On my terms." I felt a cold knot of apprehension form in my stomach. "Emily, are you sure that's wise?" "The protective order expired when he left the military," she finished for me. I checked. "And I'm not talking about confronting him in person. I need to say my piece, and then I can close this chapter for good." Back at her apartment, Emily showed me what she meant. A letter, carefully composed over several weeks, addressed to Jason at his new workplace in Seattle. "Would you read it?" she asked, handing me the neatly printed pages. "Tell me if you think I should send it." I took the letter with a sense of both honor and trepidation. This was Emily's most private pain, her most personal thoughts about the man who had betrayed her so completely. The letter was remarkable, not for its accusations or recriminations, though it acknowledged the harm Jason had done, but for its clear-eyed assessment of the relationship and its ultimate failure. Emily wrote not as a victim but as a survivor, someone who had examined the wreckage and salvaged wisdom from the debris. "This isn't about forgiveness," she had written toward the end. "I don't forgive you, and I don't expect you to ask for it. This is about freedom. My freedom from the power you once held over me. I'm writing this letter not because you deserve to hear from me, but because I deserve to speak my truth. And having spoken it, I can finally let it, and you, go." When I finished reading, I looked up to find Emily watching me anxiously. "Well?" she asked. "Is it too much? Not enough?" I carefully refolded the letter and handed it back to her. "It's exactly right," I said. "And yes, I think you should send it, not for him, but for you. Emily nodded, placing the letter in an envelope she had already addressed. I'll mail it tomorrow, she said, sealing it with a decisive press of her hand. And then it's done. That night, as I prepared for bed in Emily's guest room, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had taken together. From that terrible night at Lewis McCord to this moment of quiet resolution in Georgia. The path had not been easy or straightforward. Justice in its fullest sense had perhaps been compromised. Jason had avoided court-martial through his resignation, and now he was rebuilding his life in the civilian sector, likely telling himself and others a version of events that cast him as the victim of circumstance rather than the perpetrator of abuse. But there was another kind of justice at work here. The justice of truth spoken aloud, of secrets brought into the light, of a young woman reclaiming her power and her future. Emily was healing, growing stronger every day, turning her painful experience into fuel for positive change, and perhaps that was the most powerful justice of all. 1 year to the day after Emily had arrived at my quarters with her uniform, torn and her face bruised, I stood in the Fort Benning Officers Club watching her receive her captain's bars. The promotion ceremony was small, but significant, a formal recognition of Emily's exemplary service and leadership potential. General Donovan had flown in from Lewis McCord for the occasion, a gesture that spoke volumes about his respect for Emily and his continued support of her career. He stood beside me now, applauding as Colonel Winters pinned the new rank insignia on Emily's shoulders. "She's come a long way," he said quietly, pride evident in his voice. Captain Rhodes, is a credit to the uniform." "Yes, she is," I agreed, watching as Emily accepted congratulations from her colleagues and subordinates. Her smile was genuine, her posture confident, her handshake firm. Looking at her now, it was hard to reconcile this assured young officer with the shattered woman who had collapsed into my arms that night. After the ceremony, as guests mingled over champagne and appetizers, Colonel Winters approached me with a warm smile. "Colonel Monroe, I wanted to thank you personally for your contribution to our new training program. The materials you developed on recognizing and addressing abuse within the ranks have been invaluable." "I'm glad to hear it," I replied. "It's important work." "Indeed it is. And speaking of important work, I have some news that might interest you." She glanced around to ensure we wouldn't be overheard. "The Pentagon is establishing a task force on domestic violence prevention in military families. They're looking for a senior officer to lead it, someone with both personal experience and professional credibility on the issue." I raised an eyebrow, immediately understanding her implication. "Are you suggesting I apply?" "More than suggesting," she replied. "I've already submitted your name for consideration. General Donovan has added his recommendation as well." I glanced across the room to where Donovan was, engaged in conversation with Emily. He caught my eye briefly and nodded, confirming Winters' words. "It would mean a transfer to Washington," Colonel Winters continued. "A 2-year assignment, possibly longer if the initiative proves successful." "Washington," I repeated, thinking of the implications. A prestigious assignment, certainly, and important work that could make a real difference in the Kishiu lives of military families. But also a move away from Lewis McCord, away from the base that had been my home for so long. "Think about it," Winters said, patting my arm. "The selection committee won't make their decision for another month, but for what it's worth, I think you're exactly the right person for this role." As she moved away to speak with other guests, Emily joined me, her new captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders. "What was that about?" she asked, following my gaze as Colonel Winters rejoined the gathering. "You looked serious." "Just shop talk," I replied, not quite ready to share the news until I'd had time to consider it fully. "Congratulations, Captain Rhodes. Your promotion is well-deserved." Emily smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Does this mean you'll stop giving me advice on how to run my career now that I'm moving up the ranks?" "Not a chance," I laughed. "Some motherly privileges transcend rank." Later that evening, after the other guests had departed, Emily, General Donovan, and I sat in a quiet corner of the Officers' Club, sharing a bottle of aged scotch that Donovan had brought as a gift for Emily's promotion. "To Captain Rhodes," he said, raising his glass. "May your career continue to be marked by the same courage and integrity you've shown thus far." "Hear, hear," I echoed, clinking my glass against theirs. Emily took a small sip of the scotch, making a face at the strong flavor before setting her glass down. "Thank you both for coming today. It means more than I can say." "We wouldn't have missed it," Donovan assured her. "Your mother and I are very proud of what you've accomplished here at Benning." "Speaking of accomplishments," Emily said, turning to me with a knowing look, When were you planning to tell me about the Pentagon task force? I shot a questioning glance at Donovan, who raised his hands in mock surrender. Don't look at me. Colonel Winters must have mentioned it to her. She did, Emily confirmed, after telling me she'd recommended you for the position. I sighed, taking another sip of scotch to buy myself a moment. I only just heard about it myself. I haven't decided whether to pursue it. Why not? Emily asked. It sounds like an incredible opportunity. Your experience, your perspective, you'd be perfect for it. It would mean leaving Lewis McChord, I pointed out, leaving the Pacific, Northwest altogether, and coming to the East Coast, Emily countered, much closer to Georgia than Washington State. I hadn't considered that angle, that a move to Washington, D.C. would actually bring me geographically closer to Emily than I was now. The thought was appealing, I had to admit. Besides, she continued, think of the impact you could have. This task force could change how the military handles domestic violence cases. It could help people like me. Her words struck home, as I knew she intended them to. How many other Emilys were out there in the military community, suffering in silence, afraid to speak out against abusive partners who used rank and position as shields? How many could be helped by better policies, better training, better support systems? I'll think about it, I promised, meeting her gaze. General Donovan cleared his throat. Actually, there's something else you both should know. He set his glass down carefully. Jason Holt has been hired as a consultant by a defense contractor working on a project at the Pentagon. The news landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension through our small group. Emily's face remained impressively neutral, though I noticed her knuckles whiten as she gripped her glass more tightly. I see, she said evenly. And this is relevant because if Colonel Monroe accepts the task force position, there's a possibility they might cross paths, Donovan explained. I thought you both should be prepared for that contingency. I studied Emily's face, looking for signs of distress, but she merely nodded thoughtfully. All the more reason for Mom to take the job then. Emily, I began, concerned by her apparent eagerness to place me in potential conflict with Jason. No, hear me out, she interrupted. Jason walked away from what he did with barely a scratch on his record. A general discharge, a few months of unemployment, and then right back into the defense. Community as if nothing happened. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the steel beneath it. I'm not suggesting you go to Washington to confront him or expose him or anything like that. Then what are you suggesting? I asked. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. I'm suggesting you go to Washington to do important work that might prevent what happened to me from happening to others. And if, in the course of doing that work, Jason Holt has to see you succeeding and thriving, has to be reminded of the consequences of his actions every time he glimpses you in the Pentagon corridors, well, that's just a bonus. General Donovan chuckled softly. I told you she had a strategic mind, Catherine. That she does, I agreed, feeling a surge of pride at my daughter's strength and clarity. 2 days later, as I prepared to return to Lewis McChord, Emily drove me to the Columbus airport. We had spent the weekend exploring the area around Fort Benning, hiking in the Georgia forests, and visiting local historical sites. Throughout our excursions, we had carefully avoided further discussion of the Pentagon position, though I knew it remained on both our minds. As we pulled into the airport parking lot, Emily turned to me with a serious expression. Before you go, I want to tell you something. What is it? I asked, noting the determination in her eyes. I got a response to my letter. It took me a moment to understand what she meant, and then I remembered. The letter she had sent to Jason nearly 6 months earlier, laying out her truth and claiming her freedom from his influence. From Jason? I asked, surprised. What did he say? It doesn't matter, she replied, reaching into her purse and pulling out an unopened envelope. I haven't read it, and I'm not going to. She handed me the envelope, and I saw that it was indeed addressed to Emily in a handwriting I recognized as Jason's. The postmark was from Seattle, dated 3 months earlier. Why haven't you opened it? Emily smiled, a serene, confident smile that warmed my heart. Because I don't need to know what he thinks or feels or wants to say. I said my piece not for his benefit, but for mine. His response, whatever it might be, has no power over me anymore. She took the envelope back and, without ceremony, tore it in half, then in quarters, then into tiny pieces that she placed in the car's cup holder. That chapter of my life is closed, she said simply. I'm writing new ones now. As I watched her methodically destroy Jason's letter without even reading it, I realized that Emily had achieved something powerful, not just healing from her trauma, but transcending it. She had taken back her narrative, reclaimed her strength, and moved forward on her own terms. And in doing so, she had taught me something essential about true justice. It wasn't always found in courtrooms or tribunals or formal proceedings. Sometimes the most profound justice came in quieter moments of personal reclamation, of speaking truth to power, of refusing to allow the past to dictate the future. At the security checkpoint, we embraced for a long moment, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, stroking her hair as I had when she was a child. "So incredibly proud." "I know, Mom," she replied, squeezing me tightly before stepping back. "Call me when you decide about Washington, okay?" I nodded, already knowing what my decision would be, though I wasn't quite ready to say it aloud. "I will." As I boarded the plane that would take me back to Lewis McChord, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had begun at 1:07 a.m. exactly 1 year earlier. That night, when Emily had arrived at my quarters with her uniform torn and her spirit nearly broken, I could never have imagined where the path would lead us, through pain and confusion, through the complicated machinery of military justice, through healing and renewal, and finally to this moment of quiet. Triumph. The system wasn't perfect. Jason had avoided the full consequences of his actions through his connections and the military's preference for swift, discreet resolutions over messy public proceedings. He was rebuilding his career in the civilian sector, likely telling himself and others a version of events that minimized his culpability. But there was another kind of accountability at work. Here, the accountability that comes from truth spoken aloud, from secrets brought into the light, from a young woman reclaiming her power and her future. Emily was healing, growing stronger every day, turning her painful experience into fuel for positive change. And soon I would be doing the same in Washington, working to ensure that the military justice system better served those it was meant to protect. If I occasionally crossed paths with Jason Holt in Pentagon corridors, so be it. My presence would be a reminder that actions have consequences, that truth endures even when justice is imperfect, that power and rank cannot ultimately shield the abuser from accountability. As the plane lifted off, carrying me away from Emily but toward a new chapter in both our lives, I thought about the words that had guided my military career from the beginning. Duty, honor, integrity. Words that had sometimes seemed abstract until that night when my daughter had shown me their true meaning through her courage and resilience. No rank had made Jason untouchable after all. In the end, it was not his captain's bars that defined him, but his actions. And it was not the general's stars that had, mattered most, but the simple human decency that had allowed truth to prevail over power. In the military, we often speak of battles won and lost. But the most important victories, I had learned, are not always marked by formal surrender or decisive triumph. Sometimes they come in quieter moments. In a torn letter never read. In a young officer standing tall at her promotion ceremony. In a mother and daughter finding strength together in the aftermath of betrayal. These were the victories that mattered. These were the victories that would endure.